NEN is one of the most complicated power systems in anime, not because it's poorly designed, because it's almost too well designed. Every rule connects to every other rule. Every ability has conditions, restrictions, costs, and exceptions. And the series rarely stops to explain any of it cleanly. It expects you to figure it out as you go. Most people don't. Most people finish Hunter x Hunter with a general sense of what NEN does, but a very incomplete picture of how it actually works. And that incomplete picture leaves behind questions. Why does Gon's transformation work the way it does? How can Crollo use stolen abilities? Why do some restrictions make abilities stronger? What actually happens when someone dies with active NEN? These aren't minor details. They're the foundation of everything. So let's go through every genuinely confusing thing about NEN and break it down completely, starting with the thing that confuses people most. Why restrictions make you stronger? The single most counterintuitive rule in NEN is this one. Adding restrictions to your ability makes it more powerful. That makes no logical sense on the surface. Limiting something should make it weaker, not stronger. But here's where the real mechanics reveal themselves. NEN isn't just a power system. It's a system built entirely on conviction. The strength of a NEN ability isn't determined by raw aura output alone. It's determined by how completely the user believes in what they're doing. And nothing communicates belief more clearly than a restriction. When Kurapika says chain jail can only be used against Phantom Troop members and attaches his own death as the penalty for breaking that rule, he's telling NEN something very specific. He is so certain about this purpose, so completely committed to it, that he is willing to die if he deviates from it. That level of conviction is almost impossible to fake, and NEN responds to it. The power of the ability increases because the certainty behind it is absolute. This is why the most terrifying NEN abilities in the series all carry brutal restrictions. The restriction isn't a handicap. It's a proof of commitment. And the more extreme the proof, the more extreme the reward. This is also why random abilities without restrictions tend to be weaker than abilities built around very specific conditions. The specificity is the strength. The narrower the purpose, the more power NEN pours into that specific channel. Think of it like water through a pipe. A wide pipe gives you broad, weak flow. A narrow pipe concentrates that same pressure into something that can cut through stone. Restrictions are the narrow pipe, and what comes out the other end is something genuinely horrifying to face in a fight. Because you're not fighting the ability anymore. You're fighting the person's willingness to destroy themselves to use it. That's a nightmare most opponents aren't prepared for. The 6 categories and why they matter. Most people know the 6 NEN categories exist. Enhancement, emission, transmutation, conjuration, manipulation, specialization. What most people don't understand is why your category is fixed. You can't choose it. You discover it. When a NEN user first undergoes REN and observes their aura in water, the color the water turns reveals their natural category, and that category is determined by personality. Enhancers tend to be straightforward, direct, and focused. Emitters tend to be short-tempered and impatient. Transmuters tend to be moody, whimsical, and unpredictable. Conjurers tend to be meticulous, cautious, and methodical. Manipulators tend to be logical and goal-oriented, sometimes to the exclusion of everything else. And specialists are outliers entirely. People who don't fit neatly into any of the 5 primary categories. But here's the confusing part that most explanations leave out. You can use abilities from categories other than your own. It's just much harder. Your natural category is where you operate at 100% efficiency. Adjacent categories on the hexagonal chart are accessible at reduced efficiency. And the category directly opposite yours is the hardest to access of all, operating at a tiny fraction of what your natural category can produce. This is why Gon, as an enhancer, can use enhancement abilities with devastating effectiveness, and why it would be nearly impossible for him to use conjuration at any meaningful level. The category doesn't limit what you can attempt. It determines how much of your actual potential you can access in each area. And here's the disturbing implication buried inside that rule. Your personality determines your power, not your training, not your dedication. Who you fundamentally are as a person decides which category you belong to before you ever throw a single punch. That means 2 people can train for the exact same amount of time and one of them will hit a ceiling. The other simply doesn't have, purely because of the type of person they happen to be. NEN doesn't reward effort equally. It rewards the right kind of person doing the right kind of thing. And finding out which type you are requires an honesty about your own personality that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. What NEN vows actually do. NEN vows are different from restrictions. This distinction confuses people constantly. A restriction is a rule applied to an ability. Chain jail can only be used against Phantom Troop members. That's a restriction. A vow is a broader, more personal commitment that shapes how your NEN develops overall. Gon's transformation in the Chimera Ant arc is the clearest example of a vow. He didn't restrict a specific ability. He made a promise to his own NEN. He traded everything he could ever become in exchange for access to it all right now. That's a vow. The distinction matters because vows and restrictions stack. An ability can have restrictions attached to it. Those restrictions can then exist inside the broader framework of a vow the user has already made. The combination of the two produces abilities that would be literally impossible by any other means. Kurapika's Emperor Time is the perfect example. Emperor Time itself operates under the framework of a vow. Every second it's active, an hour of his lifespan disappears. That's not a restriction on the ability. That's the cost of the vow that makes the ability possible at all. And inside Emperor Time, his individual chain abilities each carry their own restrictions on top of that. This layering of vows over restrictions over specific conditions is how NEN generates abilities that seem to violate the rules of the system itself. They don't violate the rules. They're the rules operating at maximum intensity. Why post-mortem? NEN is terrifying. One of the most disturbing and least explained concepts in the series is post-mortem NEN. The basic fact is this. When a NEN user dies, their NEN doesn't necessarily disappear. Under certain conditions, it can become stronger. This should be impossible by common logic. The person is dead. Their aura should dissipate without someone to control it. But here's where the system reveals something genuinely unsettling. NEN responds to emotion. And there is no emotion stronger than what a person carries at the moment of their death. If someone dies consumed by hatred, by love, by obsession, or by desperate unfinished purpose, that emotion can anchor their NEN to the world even after the body stops functioning. And without a living consciousness to regulate it, that NEN becomes wild, uncontrolled, and in some cases, dramatically more powerful than it ever was in life. The Greed Island game is partly built on Ging's post-mortem NEN manipulation. The curse on the Phantom Troop's old hideout is another example. And Hisoka's resurrection exploits this principle directly. Before his death in Heaven's Arena, Hisoka instructed Bungee Gum to restart his heart after he died. The ability, anchored to his conviction about survival, continued functioning even after his death. Post-mortem NEN is terrifying because it means that killing a powerful NEN user doesn't always solve the problem. Sometimes it makes the problem worse. Sometimes the most dangerous version of someone's NEN is the version that outlives them. Think about what that means in practical terms. You spend everything you have defeating an opponent. You win. And then their hatred, still attached to you, still anchored to their obsession with your destruction, begins pulling at you from beyond their death. There is no defense against that. You can't negotiate with a dead person's conviction. You can't reason it into stopping. The most grotesque outcome is one the series hints at repeatedly without spelling out. The strongest enemies in Hunter x Hunter aren't always the ones still breathing. Sometimes the most devastating thing a powerful person can do is simply die with enough unfinished feelings still inside them. How Skill Hunter actually works. Crollo's Skill Hunter confuses people constantly because the explanation the series gives is accurate but incomplete. Here is what the series tells you. Crollo can steal abilities. He stores them in Bandit's Secret. He reads the page to use them. Here is what the series doesn't fully explain. Each stolen ability doesn't actually belong to Crollo. What Bandit's Secret captures is a copy of the ability's structure. The original owner loses the ability permanently, and what Crollo has is functionally identical to the original, with one critical difference. It exists inside a system that requires him to maintain it actively. This is why the book is so central to Skill Hunter. The book isn't decoration. It's the structure holding the stolen abilities together. Without it, those copies would simply dissolve. Why Gon's transformation worked. And what it cost. Gon's transformation in the Chimera Ant arc is the most extreme NEN vow in the series, and it's also the most misunderstood. Most people interpret it as Gon temporarily borrowing power from his future self. That's not quite accurate. What Gon actually did was more disturbing than that. He traded his potential. Not borrowed it. Traded it permanently. Every year of growth he would ever experience, every ability he would ever develop, every ounce of power he would ever accumulate, through training and effort and time, all of that future potential was exchanged in a single transaction. In return, his body instantly became the maximum version of itself. Not a temporary loan. A permanent sale. This is why Gon's aura disappeared completely after the fight. He hadn't spent it. He had simply run out of it. A person's NEN potential is like a well. Training deepens the well. Time fills it. Gon's vow drained the entire well in one moment and then permanently closed it. The only reason he wasn't dead afterward is that the vow itself, having been completed, allowed his body to remain. But it left him entirely without NEN. With no remaining potential to build from. Effectively ended as a NEN user. His eventual recovery is treated as extraordinary in the narrative because it genuinely is. By every rule the system had established, Gon should never have been able to use NEN again. And here is the most disturbing detail of all. He was warned. Not explicitly. But every rule of NEN that the series had laid out up to that point made the consequences obvious to anyone paying attention. Gon knew what he was doing. He didn't care. That's not bravery. That's grief so complete it looks identical to self-destruction. And the fact that the system rewarded him anyway, that he recovered, that his potential somehow rebuilt itself, is treated in the narrative not as a happy ending, but as something closer to a miracle that should not have happened. Even NEN, it seems, makes exceptions for something it doesn't fully understand. The fact that Gon's conviction was so pure, so completely without strategy, may be the only reason he survived it. Why NEN can't be faked. One of the most important but rarely discussed aspects of NEN is that it fundamentally cannot be fabricated. You can learn NEN techniques. You can copy the form of an ability, but you cannot replicate the conviction underneath it. This is why Gon's abilities are so effective despite his relatively simple power set. His enhancement is brutally strong not because enhancement is special, but because Gon's conviction behind every punch is completely genuine. There is no calculation behind it. No strategy. Just absolute, uncomplicated intention. And this is also why trained NEN users with complicated, layered abilities sometimes lose to opponents with simpler but more genuinely committed techniques. The sophistication of an ability is worth less than the depth of belief behind it. The Phantom Troop's members are terrifying, not because they have the most complex abilities in the series. It's because every single one of them carries complete, unwavering conviction in what they do. Uvogin doesn't have a complicated ability. He enhances his body. That's it. But his conviction is so absolute that his enhancement reaches levels that should be physically impossible. The body is just the instrument. The conviction is the actual power. And this creates one of the most brutal dynamics in the entire series. A technically superior fighter with a more complicated ability can lose to a simpler opponent whose conviction is deeper. Because NEN doesn't grade on technique alone, it grades on truth. The most terrifying opponents in Hunter x Hunter aren't the ones with the most elaborate abilities. They're the ones who are most completely, most honestly themselves. Because that honesty is what NEN responds to. And you can't out-prepare someone whose power comes not from training but from the fact that they have no doubt whatsoever about who they are and what they're willing to do. That kind of certainty is genuinely devastating to face. Because it has no weak point, you can exploit. You can understand exactly what they're doing and still be unable to stop it. The four fundamentals and why people confuse them. Ten, Zetsu, Ren, and Hatsu. These four fundamentals underpin everything in NEN, and almost nobody fully understands how they relate to each other after their first watch. Here is the clearest way to think about them. 10 is maintenance. It is the constant low-level state of keeping aura wrapped around your body. Every NEN user maintains 10 passively once they've learned it. It's the foundation. The baseline. Without 10, your aura leaks out constantly and your potential drains away without you even realizing it. Think of it as keeping the tap turned off so you don't waste water. Zetsu is the opposite of 10. Where 10 keeps aura in, Zetsu forces aura out entirely. The user suppresses all aura output completely. This makes them nearly invisible to other NEN users, which is its primary tactical use. But it also leaves them completely defenseless. A skilled NEN user can detect the absence of aura as easily as its presence. And in Zetsu, a single hit from a NEN-enhanced attack can be devastating in a way it wouldn't normally be. The defense 10 provides disappears entirely. Ren is the escalation above 10. Where 10 maintains a baseline, Ren dramatically increases aura output and keeps it concentrated around the body. This amplifies physical abilities to terrifying levels. Strength, speed, and durability all increase dramatically under Ren. It's what enhancers use when they want to hit harder. But it's also what every category of NEN user needs to reach for when the situation demands raw physical output. The twisted detail about Ren is that maintaining it is exhausting. The more powerful the Ren, the faster it drains the user. Which is why prolonged battles between NEN users are so punishing. Every second at full Ren burns through reserves at a rate that makes extended fights genuinely dangerous even for the winner. And then there's Hatsu. Hatsu is the expression of your individual ability. It's where the 6 categories actually come into play. Everything before Hatsu, Ten, Zetsu, and Ren is universal. Every NEN user does these things the same way. Hatsu is where everything becomes personal. Your category determines what kind of Hatsu expression comes most naturally to you. Your personality shapes what your Hatsu looks like. And your conviction determines how powerful that expression becomes. This is the critical point that most viewers miss entirely. The 4 fundamentals aren't separate tools you pick from a menu. They're a layered system where each level builds on the one beneath it. You can't have powerful Hatsu without strong Ren. You can't maintain Ren without solid 10. And you can't use any of them effectively in combat without understanding when to switch between them. The most horrifying NEN users in the series aren't the ones with the most impressive Hatsu. They're the ones who have mastered all 4 fundamentals so completely that switching between them mid-fight becomes seamless. Invisible. By the time you notice what they're doing, they've already done it. Final verdict. NEN is not confusing because it was poorly thought through. It's confusing because it was designed to reward the people who pay attention. Every rule connects to every other rule. Restrictions build on vows. Post-mortem NEN builds on emotion. Category limits build on personality. Conviction runs underneath all of it, like a current powering everything at once. Once you understand that the system is fundamentally psychological rather than physical, every confusing detail clicks into place. Chain Jail becomes obvious. Gon's transformation becomes inevitable. Hisoka's resurrection becomes logical. And Krollo's ability becomes not a cheat but a masterwork of understanding exactly how the system rewards preparation and obsession. NEN isn't really a power system. It's a mirror. It shows you exactly who you are, and then it decides how much power that person deserves. And in the world of Hunter x Hunter, the most dangerous people are never the ones who are the most talented. They are the ones who know themselves most completely, and who are willing to pay whatever price that knowledge demands. The deepest secret NEN is hiding. But here is the part most people never reach. The part that changes everything once you see it. NEN doesn't just reflect who you are right now. It reflects who you are becoming. Every time a NEN user pushes past a limitation, every time they survive a restriction they imposed on themselves, every time they make a vow and actually keep it, their NEN grows. Not because they trained harder, because they became more completely themselves. This is the real reason Gon is so terrifying as a fighter despite his simple ability. He is not becoming a better enhancer. He is becoming more completely Gon. And NEN responds to that completeness with more power than any technique alone could generate. This is also why the most devastating characters in Hunter x Hunter are rarely the ones who started the strongest. They are the ones who went through something that forced them to confront exactly who they are, and came out the other side more certain, more honest, more completely themselves than before. That is the secret the series never states directly. NEN doesn't reward power. It rewards truth. And the most truthful people in this world are almost always the most dangerous ones alive.